Hi, everybody. It's time for Sunday School Bonanza, a This Week in Mormons production. You can visit us at thisweekinmormons.com. Shoot us an email, contact at thisweekinmormons.com. Visit us on the social mediums or media. Be there. Hang out with us. Facebook, like us, all that stuff. We'd love to have you there. It'd be a good time. For those of you who are listening for the first time, this is where we give you a rundown of a gospel doctrine lesson in order to get you better prepared than perhaps you otherwise would be when you go to gospel doctrine. And I'm joined by, once again, the prodigal son himself has returned. Dustin Homer's here.
And thank you for slaying the fatted calf.
I love this. I love this. We had Bill last week. Bill came back. Bill hadn't been around for a while. You know Bill.
Of course I know Bill.
You know Bill. Now we got Dustin back in the house. We're getting back in our groove.
It's good to be home, Jeff. It's good to be home.
Thank you. It's good to have you here. Lesson this week, lesson 29. He took up, the mantle of Elijah. So we're talking all about who took up the mantle of Elijah.
Well, it must have been his successor, Elisha.
Yeah. Elisha is an interesting character. Obviously, Elijah was kind of just a lion in a way. I mean, Elijah was just, you don't mess around with the guy. Mocks the priests of Baal. Doesn't care about anything. He just
calls down fire from heaven.
Yeah, he just does whatever he wants.
No problem.
Elisha, to my understanding, a little more reserved in a sense, it seems like. He almost seems like he's Elijah's lackey in a way.
You think so?
Maybe not in a bad way, but even we kind of joked before we started that it almost seems like Elisha kind of followed Elijah all around the Levant, and Elijah's just like, get out of here! What? Why do you keep following me? I don't need you. And he's just like, no, right?
I guess you can interpret multiple ways.
Is that the justification?
Yeah, no. I mean, I don't know. But one thing's for sure is that he was one loyal guy,
big time,
in a huge way, and it then led to him becoming, I think, a really powerful servant.
Yeah, and he learned a lot. I mean, he traveled with Elijah for about 6 or 7 years.
Was it that long?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was that long. And of course, he was notably, I would say, gentler than Elijah. I think he still stood his ground, but he was decidedly less confrontational, I think, than Elijah. Elijah just didn't care at all. Elijah was like poking a bear, and he'd just be like, speaking of bears, folks, don't worry.
We're getting there.
Bears still get poked in this lesson. So what happens, though, is we know that Elijah is going to effectively move on from the prophetship, right?
Exactly. And he knows, and I don't know how he knows, but he knows that his time is about done.
Okay, so what does he do?
So he goes
Walk
on a
us
journey.
through it. Paint for us a word picture.
So Elijah goes on a journey with a destination that presumably only he knows. And at each stop, at each city along the way, he tells Elisha that he should stay. Tells Elisha to stay, go his way, do his own thing. And Elisha refuses. At every single stop, Elisha says, no, I'm going to stay with you. No, let's keep going. No, I'm not leaving you. Until eventually they get to the final destination, at which Elijah says, it's time, I'm going. And Elisha says, okay. And Elijah says, what do you want? And Elisha says, well, actually, I want double the spirit that you have.
Yeah.
And Elijah says, well, if you see God take me, then it'll be granted.
Yeah.
And
God takes him. And there's
in dramatic fashion.
Yeah, so he's translated is what we believe. But there's an interesting caveat here. Many of us assume, because when we discuss translation in the church, we often equate that with exaltation on the spot. And the history of the church itself actually does away with that notion. It's to understand, actually, it says here, quote, many have supposed that the doctrine of translation was a doctrine whereby men were taken immediately into the presence of God and into an eternal fullness, but this is a mistaken idea. Their place of habitation is that of the terrestrial order, and a place prepared for such characters he held in reserve to be ministering angels unto many planets, and who as yet have not entered in so great a fullness as those who are resurrected from the dead. So it's an interesting point.
Interesting.
So they're translated, but as it even says, they're not even equal to those who perhaps have resurrected from the dead.
Interesting.
With Christ, the first resurrection. So.
But he did have a chariot.
Yeah, he did. So he went up to serve, which makes, I think, in my mind, perfect sense. I mean, so we can, I think, safely assume that even when Elijah appeared to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, that was still in his translated form. But even for him, that's not the final. You could argue that even then Elijah is, well, actually no, sorry, this is before Christ's resurrection. I might be off base.
I don't know.
Point is, different things happen. So it wasn't just exalted on the spot.
But he's definitely gone.
He's gone, and Elisha takes something physical, which I love, because back then the prophets actually wore a mantle, and this is why we use the expression the mantle of the prophet, because a mantle was an actual, almost like just a big shoulder pad sort of accessory type thing. I mean, I don't know. That's a stupid way to simplify it.
Cloak, maybe.
But yeah, a cloak, a big thing. You wore it over your shoulders. It was white.
Right.
And it was a very direct physical symbol of one being the anointed, of one being a prophet. And so for Elisha to take it, I mean, that was allowed. He didn't just grab it, but he took it. And that was a serious thing. And there's actually a moment, I forget where it is it's in one of the verses here in 2 Kings chapter 2, but where like the people see Elisha and they see him wearing it and they see him perform many of the same miracles that Elijah performed, such as like parting the Jordan,
and walking across,
which was huge because Elijah famously did that when he had the sealing power to seal the rains and the rivers. He sealed the waters and went across, and then Elisha does the same thing, and he's wearing the mantle, and the people say, "Wait a minute,
he's."
Different guy, but same action."
Exactly.
This is like when Dick Sargent replaces Dick York.
Yes, it is.
Bewitched.
Darren
Darren Stevens.
I'm not following.
Character.
I'm
TV
sorry.
show.
No. Anyway,
Okay.
But I'm sure it was similar. But so the people look and they say, "Yeah, this guy's got Elijah's mantle." But then there's several people who aren't so sure about what's actually happened to Elijah. Right?
Yeah.
So a bunch of them are pushing Elisha to say, let us go and find out what happened to Elijah. Let's go look for him. So they put together a search party. They obviously pester Elisha until he can't say no, and he says, "Sure, go look for him." And
Right.
50 guys spend 3 days trying to find Elijah, of course, to no avail. And they come back, and Elisha basically says, "I told you so."
Yeah.
Which is fair. and that's the lesson the Israelites had about why you listen to the prophet the first time.
Big time. And I also love the way the mantle was passed, and we have a lot to learn from that. And then it's funny because we have like a quote from Joseph Fielding Smith. It's in the manual, but he said, there's no mystery about the choosing of the successor of the president of the church, the officer of the church, and he is so sustained by the council of the 12. Oh, sorry. Lord settled this a long time ago, and the senior apostle automatically becomes the presiding officer of the church, which is true, and it's great that we have that figured out. But I love that even in our own church history, we didn't have that figured out the gate.
No, it is. It is interesting.
The Israelites had to learn that lesson in many ways, and so did we. I mean, because at first, it was not so cut and dry. We did church history last year on this podcast, but obviously you had, Parley P. Pratt was Sidney Rigdon, not Parley P. Pratt. Sidney Rigdon basically came out of nowhere and is like, "Well, yeah, it should be me, right? Me. And you got James Strang, who's like, "I also have scriptures," and lots of contention, and no one knows what is what. And we have the famous stories of Brigham Young with his countenance, but we were reminded that it was the 12 who collectively held the keys to the governing of the church. And that's why even the whole period of time when the saints first crossed the plains to get to the Salt Lake Valley, that was the 12 actually. We always envisioned Brigham Young because he was sort of the de facto leader, but he was not actually set apart as the president of the church until after they'd even arrived in the Salt Lake Valley.
Exactly.
And we've learned hard lessons in that regard. And now it's true. We have that figured out, and we know that the senior apostle. So if it were today, President Packer would, of course, take over.
Sure.
Right.
And, it's nice that we have a system that's like pretty clean and that we all get now. But I think the other really important takeaway for me is that the Lord lets his mantle fall upon whom he's selected, and then he lets people know through the Spirit, through other signs that is his anointed, right?
Yeah.
So like that's what happened here. His mantle fell on the right person and people knew it. That's what happened to Joseph Smith. That's what happened to Brigham Young. And so even without, the kind of system that we all know and trust and love now, the point is that the Lord picks his anointed and makes sure that we know it, and it's up to us to make sure we can identify that and get our own personal confirmation.
Yeah. And they can't pick it themselves. I mean, Sidney Rigdon basically was sort of assuming it for his own,
right,
without any confirmation. And we also forgot that even Joseph, before his passing, actually told the 12, like, I'm basically as much as like, I'm going to die and the keys of the kingdom are collectively held by all of you when that happens. I mean, he as much as said that to the people.
Yeah,
so
great point.
Very, very interesting. The passing of the mantle is a big old thing that happens. Now, sadly, the funny thing in the lesson is it wants us to jump to chapter 5 and just talk about Naaman, which I think we're happy to do. But I think there's some worthwhile passages in chapters 3 and 4. How about you?
If you're an insider, you really need to look at these passages.
Because
one in particular comes to mind.
There's a lot here. So first of all, everyone's going up to war against everybody else at this time, okay? So what you got here is, this is unheard of, but Judah and Israel are actually going to join forces and go against Moab, which used to be sort of a like a puppet state almost of Israel.
Right.
And the Edomites are going to help him because I guess they have some sort of, they're able to basically just like almost enslave the Edomites for Judah's cause, right?
Go to war. Yeah.
So they're going to counsel about this. They want to, figure out what to do, go together. And this is during the time of Jehoshaphat, if you've been following along, who's a righteous leader, who's been doing good things. He's kind of brought Judah back from all the terrible things that Rehoboam did. And what I love, though, is Jehoshaphat wanted the Lord's anointed there to guide them, which was Elisha. And he knew that and said, Elisha, I need you here.
Which is very commendable.
And Elisha says, I'm here for you. You're doing the right things. I'm here. Okay, I can be with you. But I love that in 2 Kings chapter 3, verses 11 through 15, you see that Elisha is actually visibly irritated by the presence of Jehoram, who's the king of Israel. Now, Jehoram is the son, I believe, of Jeroboam. Maybe the grandson, but I think it's the son of Jeroboam.
Sure.
And I like that Elisha himself actually sarcastically tells the king of Israel to seek the counsel of the false prophets of his father. He's basically like, I'm here for Jehoshaphat, so don't talk to me, okay? Go off.
Go worship your other gods.
He's like, I know you've built your random idols and your other things, so the people up in Israel don't even have to come down to Jerusalem to worship. So don't worship. Anyways, I just like a lot of sass. We don't get that.
Yeah.
And I think you have a story, Dustin, that you like even more.
I think there's the story that we must mention here.
It is a must.
Of Elisha's journey through the forest, in which he encountered youths who mocked him, saying, "Go up, thou bald head! Go up, thou bald head!"
Oh no, youths!
And he turned and he cursed them. And 2 she-bears came out of the wood and slay 40 and 2 children of them.
Yeah.
Notice I've committed that to memory. I wasn't reading that. That's
I know you weren't.
Important scripture to memorize.
You really? It's because you're from South Dakota, buddy. You're just like...
It's all I had to do for a while.
You feel it.
But anyway, I know you have some interpretation on this, Jeff, but really a fascinating passage where a prophet calls down bears to kill children.
That's the question. Did he himself call down the bears?
Enlighten us.
So I've read around, and I'm not a scholar completely, so I love anyone else's insights on this. But because many people have said, like, it's just a big, like, what the heck moment. Like, you've got the prophet is just like, you know what would be great right now? Because you guys called me names, I called down some bears and they just mauled you all to death. All 42 of you. Which seems out of character.
Slightly.
Even by many Old Testament standards. I mean, you do have Moses made the Israelites drink water with gold flecks in it from the calves and stuff like that. A lot of things we skip in our lessons. But, which is true.
Yeah, I know.
A lot of tough love goes on in the Old Testament. But, important things to remember. From the translation, it's not really little children. It's actually young lads would be the way to look at it. So you're talking like young
punks.
Basically punk kids are messing with them. And I love that they said, get out of the city, get you up, bald head. But basically, when you look at the insults they're throwing at him, they're basically calling into question his divinity as a prophet. And bald head, many scholars argue, is actually a reference to them basically calling Elisha a leper, who were outcasts at that time.
It's a major insult.
Major insult, okay? So this is very much just trashing the Lord's anointed, okay? And so when Elisha curses them, the important thing to note here is that a curse doesn't necessarily mean that he's like cast a spell like, you will suffer, and they suffer. Really, when you look at what cursing in that sense means, it actually means to deprive of something. So in this sense, he's depriving them of God's protection, which they previously, supposedly, they have merited in one way or another. But in all actuality, he takes it away from them. So I believe, personally, in the scripture, it doesn't necessarily say that Elisha said, bear, go. It was more, he pulled it away if the bears were in the vicinity, whatever else happened there. But they were clearly unprotected from that because of sinning against the Lord's prophet. Either way, I mean, it's still a pretty caustic example because that's just how it is.
But it is a fascinating story. Really something else.
And so when you get out of chapter 4, then we get to Naaman.
And here we are in chapter 5. So Naaman, the Syrian, in fact, captain of the Syrian armies, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he is a Gentile, effectively. He's a Gentile and a big deal among the Gentiles.
Yeah,
as it becomes a leper. So it talks in the verse about what an important and impressive man he is, and that he's a leper.
He's a good guy.
So things are on the downhill for him. He's basically doomed, and so sends a servant to Elisha to ask for some miracle because a young girl in his household, a young Israelite girl who had been abducted, clearly, during a military action and was now a slave in his household, came and said, oh, if only there were a prophet here like there is in Israel who could heal you. And his wife heard that and mentioned it to him, and he said, okay, let's go check out this prophet. So he sends a servant. And what does the servant say? What does Elisha tell the servant to do?
He tells him to wash in the river Jordan
7 times.
7 times.
What's that all about, right?
Well, that's what Naaman even says at first. I mean,
Exactly.
basically he questions the number of times, and I don't have the exact language, but he says, like, basically why the Jordan? Aren't all the mighty rivers effectively of Damascus better and cleaner than the muddy, tiny Jordan River? So he almost feels insulted, like, I'm going to be clean from this little creek you guys have here. He's like, I have a river, and if I go back to Syria, but
and of course Elisha doesn't speak to him directly.
No.
This is all communication
Yeah.
happening through a servant. So here, this important man, this leader of the Syrian
and he also
armies-
feels slighted in that regard too, a little bit.
Yeah, and as you could kind of expect, right?
Yeah.
But then Naaman's servants convince him to do it. They convince him to go do what Elisha said. They testify of his importance. Naaman goes, washes himself 7 times, cured of leprosy.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything in there?
No, I don't think so. I was just looking.
And so I think, though, what's fascinating is then afterward. So we have this amazing story, this amazing miracle that Elisha makes happen for Naaman, because Naaman was willing to humble himself. So Naaman's humble, he listens, he washes himself, he's healed. He's hugely grateful, offers all kinds of gifts and tokens of gratitude, which Elisha, of course, refuses, saying that this was a miracle wrought by the hand of the Lord, not by him.
Yeah.
Impressive.
And you know what's really cool? Do you know that Naaman actually took some of the soil with him to take back to Syria with him?
I didn't know that.
It's really interesting because you see here that Naaman is effectively converted in this sense unto the Lord. He really starts to believe this stuff. But you see how he doesn't get it all yet, because he's basically polytheistic,
right,
under his Syrian tradition. But he believes in Jehovah now. He sees the real power there. And because of, I think there's an aspect of Mosaic law that an altar needed to be built on that soil. So he actually took soil from the land that he could take back to Syria, upon which to build altar for religious rites. And he as much as says, like, he'll be happy to worship Jehovah along with his other gods. So he doesn't totally get it yet. But I love that you see the earnestness sort of in his gratitude of saying, like, not only did you heal me, I'm glad I listened to you, but even though I don't get it all yet, I want to, I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to apply what I've learned and be converted in that sense.
That's such an interesting point, because we don't necessarily, I think another takeaway is we don't necessarily have to get it all in order for the Lord to bless us for humility and obedience, right? You follow a correct principle, you show humility, you're willing to do what the Lord or one of his servants says, even if you don't completely comprehend everything, and he wants to bless you, he's bound to bless you. It's a really interesting point.
Yeah. Last part of the lesson, I guess we're kind of in our waning moments, though, here, folks. Basically, there's a war with Syria. Elisha guides Israel with Syria. Dustin, give us the takeaway points there.
The big takeaway.
Elevator pitch me.
Don't you wonder if Naaman's here? Sorry, I'm just.
I have always often wondered that. Like, why are they fighting? Isn't Naaman like, guys, no.
Yeah, these are my friends. So here's the takeaway, right? They are surrounded. The Israelites surrounded. There's Syrians everywhere. They're in the city. Everything is looking bad. People are totally afraid. Except Elisha. Elisha's not scared. Elisha's servant looks up at Elisha, this young boy, and says, Elisha, like, what's going on? It's all over, right?
Yeah.
We are going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
And what does Elisha say? He says, don't worry, they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And then he prays, asks that his servant's eyes will be opened up, and then that servant sees the glorious hosts of heaven waiting to protect the prophet of the Lord and his anointed people from any impending destruction. They that be with us are more than they that be with them.
I think those are perfect final words right there.
I think so.
Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed this. Let us know how we're doing. We love hearing from you. Dustin, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Always appreciate your insights. This is lesson 29. He took up the mantle of Elijah. Sunday School Bonanza. This week in